Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I think it depends where you connect from. Welcome to GSEF webinar on the power of the community, social solidarity economy, and financial systems to fight against the COVID-19 crisis. I am Laurence Kwark, Secretary General of the Global Social Economy Forum, known as GSEF. I will be the moderator for today. This webinar is the last of the third series of webinars on this theme, jointly organized by the GSEF and the local organizing committee of GSEF 2021 in Mexico for preparing our virtual forum in October 2020. Actually, that we had already organized the French webinar on July 7 and the Spanish webinar on this same theme was held last week on July 14. This theme, power of the community and social solidarity economy and financial systems to fight against the COVID-19 crisis, is a theme that animates all the reflections of public and private actors, since it constitutes the cornerstone of overall strategy to better respond to the challenges faced by the social solidarity economic organizations and enterprise. How to meet social needs and best maintain the economic activity of social solidarity economic organizations and enterprise so affected by the current crisis. How to facilitate an equitable and inclusive access to fundings for all social solidarity economy organizations. What financial levers for the social solidarity economy to support them in this period of crisis and to revive after crisis. These are few questions that will be answered today by our 5 distinguished experts. The very first speaker will be Patsian, Chief Staff of Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, the biggest and the fast growing funders and philanthropy network in Asia Pacific region. Our second speaker will be Mr. Jongduk, Engagement Manager from Social Value and Solidarity Foundation of Korea. Our third speaker will be Dr. Frank Aswani, CEO of the Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance from South Africa. And our fourth speaker, he won't be able to be connected in person because Mr. Clifford Rosenthal is from USA and is at 4 o'clock in the morning. So he has sent us a recorded message of his contribution. And he's the author of the book, Democratizing Finance. And he's the founder and animator of the Community Development Financial Institution Movement in the USA. And our last speaker will be Mr. Daniel Sorrosal, Secretary General of the European Federation of Ethical and Alternative Bank. Before to start, I would like to remind again all speakers that you have 10 minutes to share your input, as we would like to have a little bit of time at the end of 5 contributions from all speakers for Q&A section. Please try to keep your time as strictly as possible. And all participants, please keep your video and microphone muted throughout the section in order to avoid any background noise during the section. And if you would like to introduce yourself and get engaged with the other participants, please use the icon called chat at the bottom in the middle of the screen. If you have questions to address to the speakers, also put your questions in chat box, and then we will make sure that your questions will be delivered to the speakers. Now, without much delay, I would like to invite our very first speaker, Patsian, Chief of Staff of the AVPN and member of GSEF Steering Committee. Pat, you have the floor.
Hello there, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody that is online. I'm very, very happy to be here today. Thank you, Laurence and the GSEF team for having us here. I am excited to be here to share some of our perspectives from Asia, particularly in our interactions with the social investment community to respond to this very important crisis of COVID-19. May I ask for the organizers to put up my presentation, please? And I will begin my sharing.
Martin? Yeah, okay.
Yes, I see that now. Thank you very much. If you could just move forward to the next slide. And as Laurence had introduced, I am Patsian, the Chief of Staff and Policy Advisor for AVPN. We are the largest social investment network in Asia. We currently represent over 600 organizations who are interested in moving their financial and non-financial capital for impact. And just to set for context, and this is something that I'm sure many of you online also are already familiar with, the importance of providing funding and non-financial support to the social economy is very, very high and has been of escalating importance in Asia over the past couple of decades, quite clearly because we have seen big financing gaps to address complex issues. We are also seeing a growing concentration of wealth. And at the same time, while we are trying to address the growing interest of wanting to move more capital into supporting social impact, there is a lack of an enabling environment to do so. And that's why AVPN exists. If I could ask you to move to the next slide, please. So AVPN as a network currently has members of over 600 organizations around the world. We are headquartered out of Singapore, and our members represent all organizations that are interested in moving capital for impact for as far west as the Middle East and as far east and even further south, all the way to the Pacific. So we currently are located across 13 different markets, and we work with organizations that represent a full diversity in the capital spectrum. On the next slide, please. We work with foundations, trusts, corporates, governments, universities, family offices, private equity funds, venture funds, incubators, accelerators, impact funds, and financial institutions as well, all to work with them to break down silos and find different kinds of partners that can mobilize different forms of social investment capital, ranging from financial, human, and intellectual capital to create maximum impact. And we also make sure that the policy engagement with this community is a constructive one, so that we can see policy intervening and partnering at different levels to create a wide-ranging effect across different impact areas, particularly as we welcome a new generation of policymakers who are innovating and collaborating with social investment. So using that to set the stage, I'd like to share with you a little bit about our insights over the past few months about how the social investment community has been responding to the COVID-19 crisis in Asia. You can see from this slide here, and I apologize if the text is a little bit small, but welcome all of you to visit the AVPN website to see more information about our community's COVID-19 response. This is a snapshot of what our members across all of these different markets who are active in Asia are already doing in response to COVID-19. We are seeing that not only are the foundations, the corporates, the financial institutions, the impact funds, and the various social impact organizations, not only are they very active in terms of what they're trying to do, they are being very collaborative about what they're trying to achieve, reaching out across sectors, looking for foundations, for example, to come together to pledge different activities, looking for foundations, looking for corporate partners and investment partners to do more on the ground, government partners looking for more private sector investors and funders to work with them to roll out solutions that are critically needed in the communities. At the same time, many of our members are also realizing the importance of supporting the ground organizations. I think my presentation may have suddenly dropped off. If the organizers could pull it back up, that would be great. I'd like to also mention that not only are our members seeing the importance of contributing towards the needs on the ground, they are also seeing the importance of ensuring that the organizations on the ground are themselves resilient and are able to thrive during this crisis. And if you look on the right side of that slide, you can see that the organizations that we're talking about in our network are looking to provide a range of support for these organizations, including funding, including capacity building, and other forms of toolkits, consultation, advisory services, even awards and competitions that are looking to showcase the best practitioners in COVID-19 response, as well as other kinds of support that they're providing. Now, across the entire AVPN community, we're pleased to say that together our members represent over $10 billion worth of capital that they are already putting towards COVID-19 response. Now, of course, our members range from small organizations to large conglomerates, but the extent to which this amount of capital has been mobilized is an optimistic sign, but we also know that there is a lot more to be done. What we're sharing here is further examples of the kind of work that they're doing. So one of our key initiatives that we're supporting in India, for example, is our member Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who are looking to particularly address the preventive measures that are being rolled out in 2 states in India that are underserved, namely Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, so that the local solutions that can promote awareness and preventive measures in combating COVID-19 can be scaled up, cutting across systemic issues like WASH, nutrition, and education. In the Philippines, our partner Ayala Foundation, as well as other members, are also actively coming together in what's called Project Ugnayan, which is the single largest private sector-led fundraising collaboration to date, to support households that have been displaced due to community quarantine efforts in the Philippines, reaching out over 5 million people now as of a couple of months ago. And in Indonesia, we have members like Jarum Foundation, Indika Foundation, and Copernic, Yayasan Tahia. They have all come together in what's called an AVPN Gotong Royong movement. This is an integrated effort so that all the various programs that are being done by foundations and other social investors can be complementary to each other and stimulating a more effective way of addressing the challenges that Indonesia is facing through the pandemic. Currently, we have over 10 organizations that are partnered in this Gotong Royong movement, and we are excited to see that more are joining us every day. Next slide, please. Now, not only from the social investment community, we are seeing such response, we are also seeing very interesting work that is being done by ground organizations and government partners that are part of AVPN's community. So here's an example where Merica Makerspace, which is an impact-driven business based in Malaysia, has developed a platform to work alongside hospitals and other social enterprises so that they can actually be a supplier of very important COVID-19 equipment and PPE items for the health system and health response in Indonesia. In India, Jharkhand state, the policymakers in Ranchi district are actively working with all forms of public sector and private sector partners so that very essential commodities can be provided to their communities through very critical microeconomy entities like convenience stores and medical establishments, so that the kinds of services and essential goods that are needed by the community can continue to be provided. And then from a corporate perspective, one of our members, Ernst & Young, as I mentioned earlier, is one of those organizations that have realized the importance of ensuring the resilience and sustainability of local economies and small businesses, and have developed a framework to support businesses so that they can be resilient and able to try to tie through this crisis with strong management and business skills, including all kinds of resources and articles and virtual sessions that would help them gain more knowledge and expertise and best practices to work their way through this pandemic. So all of this is to say, next slide please, that while this is a lot of activity that's been going on and it's very encouraging, we have observed that there are some clear considerations from among the social investors when they are responding to the pandemic, particularly when they are trying to organize the resources of financial and non-financial capital to respond to the pandemic. One of the first considerations is that there is a clear need for greater information sharing and transparency. And we strongly believe that some of these needs are not just specific to Asia, but also global in nature as well. So the lack of data and transparency in the current social investment environment is already a challenge, and that is further exacerbated during a crisis time like this. So recently, WINGS, which stands for the Worldwide Initiative of Grantmaker Support, had done a survey among their membership of global grantmaking organizations. And in that survey, it was noted that over 75% of the respondents, who are all grantmaker organizations, they pointed out that resource sharing and information is actually the most urgent need for them at this point to support the stakeholders that they are working with. And to combat and to address this need, we can also see that there are other efforts to put together different kinds of crowdsourced information so that various social economy actors know how to respond and where to draw on resources to advance their work, like the COVID Alliance for Social Entrepreneurs, which had been launched by the World Economic Forum. At the same time, the mainstream social investment market is also seeing that this is a good opportunity for mainstream financial instruments to be taking a bigger role in addressing some of the already pre-existing sustainability issues that have now been exacerbated with the pandemic crisis. So you can see on the right-hand side of my slide that the amount of social bonds, sustainability bonds, and COVID-themed bonds have all surged in 2020 relative to where they were proportionately in 2019. And that is showing that there is a greater opportunity now also for mainstream finance to play a bigger role in addressing the financing needs of pandemic response. Next slide, please. There is another consideration that we're seeing as well among the social investment community, and that is that many of these organizations would have already have pre-existing focus areas that they're working on, pre-existing strategies that they would have adopted. The the intent is for them to be able to have be able to do create greater impact in very important sustainability issues. Thank you, organizers, for the time prompt. I will wrap up quickly. There is intent for these organizations to do more in very important sustainable development goals like gender, like climate, and so forth. But they are also now having to juggle the need of potentially moving their funding focus areas now to response to COVID-19. We've seen this not only with grant makers, which as WING's survey also represents that kind of sentiment, but also among the impact investment community. Recent reports from GIN, which is a global impact investment network, is trying to particularly highlight some of these challenges that are faced by impact investors while they're trying to navigate through the COVID-19 environment, attempting to still adopt an investing strategy rigor and due diligence, but recognizing that COVID-19 is placing a lot of constraints on how they can do so. So that being said, given that these are some of the considerations, next slide, please. How then can we support social investors to be able to advance and do more and be more effective in responding to the crisis? So the first thing that we think is really important to consider is that just as much as we've already seen a collaborative platform and network play a role in the earlier social investment environment, in a post-pandemic reality, collaborative platforms and networks are even more important. Networks like GSEF, networks like AVPN are all very important opportunities for the kinds of partnerships and information sharing and transparency that we hope to occur take place in a neutral and easily accessible way. Some years ago, AVPN, for example, had undertaken an effort to map the social investment landscape in Asia. You see some of this here now. And the big question now that we're asking ourselves, and I'm sure our members are asking the same, is what will the social investment landscape in Asia look like now, post-pandemic? Where are the needs? Where are the actors? Who are the players? And the need for this kind of transparency is already there, it's been expressed, and it has yet to be met. So we welcome anyone really that would have an interest to explore how else we can create more data transparency and landscaping transparency so that the social investors in Asia will know who else to call on in partnership, in best practice sharing, in resource sharing, so that they can collaborate more effectively against the pandemic. And in response to the need that they have expressed about the juggling and the balance that they have to make between short-term COVID funding needs versus longer-term investment strategies, one of the things that we believe we can do better also is to look ahead into the long-term needs of recovery and rebuilding post-pandemic, to recognize how we can integrate these types of pandemic rebuilding strategies into pre-existing sustainability focus areas, like health systems, like climate action, like gender equality. It's very clear that in a pandemic environment that the implication to all of these very important thematic areas and sector issues are also very long-ranging. And we know that there is tremendous level of mutual dependency and intersectionality that can arise from this. How can we then actively, proactively create opportunities for social investors to see that if they were to put more support behind climate action, that it will also have a very important role to play in climate action as a response in pandemic rebuilding strategies as well. Next slide, please. And last but not least, to enable not only just the intent of sharing and resource transparency, to intend the integration of strategies, but to enable the action of such collaborations. So to create opportunities for partnerships, to allow multidisciplinary solutions to complex problems to arise. And we already showcase here 2 examples from Asia, the COVID Action Collaborative that was put together in India by our member Catalyst Foundation, and also Light Up Indonesia, another collaborative effort by our members to bring energy access, important energy access to rural areas in Indonesia as a critical factor to be able to recover resiliently against the pandemic. And last but not least, to crowd in solutions innovatively to enhance how markets around Asia can respond to respond to the pandemic. Essilor, for example, is looking at opportunities to roll out a development impact bond in South Asia that would grow and catalyze micro-entrepreneurship as a livelihood response in a pandemic recovery period. So we are also exploring other ways that impact funds and institutional investors can support micro and small medium enterprise liquidity in Asia during this time, because entrepreneurship is a very key pillar of Asia's economic sustainability. And I think the next one is my last slide. And then I'll wrap up. This will be my last comment. So we recognize that the global nature of the pandemic also means that the response to the pandemic has to be global. It has to be borderless, and we need to work well with global partners, which is why we're very happy to be here in GSEF today to share some of our experiences. As an Asian network, we are plugged into the global movement, currently part of the R3 coalition in JIN, the WF Alliance for social entrepreneurs. We are a member of WINGS, and we are also quite actively collaborating with our sister organizations, AVPA, Latin Pacto, and the African Venture Philanthropy Alliance, Frank, Dr. Aswani, who will share with you later. So we welcome all organizations who are interested to partner with us to join us at our pledge, and click on the links here on our presentation, and come to us with any questions that you may have. Thank you so much, Laurence. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Patsian, for very interesting and also very optimistic presentation. I think as she has shared, I think AVPN is one of the drivers which is really using in a very creative way of this pandemic environment to build much more data, informations available in transparent manners, and also try to build more collaborative platforms. And I'm so happy actually to hear what actually they have achieved using this crisis as an opportunity to advance into these very important directions. Thanks again, Patsian. I would like to ask participants to share your questions in the chat box. And I think we will make sure that Patsian will get those questions. Now I would like to invite our second speaker, Mr. Jong, Engagement Manager of the Korea Social Value and Solidarity Foundation. Mr. Jung, floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Jongduk, Engagement Manager at the Korea Social Value and Solidarity Foundation. We are the first social finance wholesale fund established in 2019 as an outcome of government announcement of social finance promotion plan in 2018. We are designed to mobilize $248 million for the next 5 years. And as of 2020, we made a commitment of $12 million to provide social patient capital to social economy enterprises, SEEs, and to invest in social impact projects in the field of urban regeneration, social housing, renewable energy, and also employment sector. We provide finance not directly to individual enterprises, but only through intermediaries. And by doing so, we believe that we could create social finance ecosystem, as intermediaries have expertise in their areas and have established very close relationship with local SEEs. So I think we believe that channeling finance through intermediaries is a crucial way of building an ecosystem. And next slide, please, Martin. Okay, before I start to give you a very brief presentation about how badly Korean social economic sector was damaged, I'll give you a very brief overview of social economic sector in Korea first. As of 2020, we have 25,000 social economy enterprises employing 260,000 people, of which 60% of employees are socially vulnerable or disadvantaged group. And their revenue is about $74 billion. And actually this figure is from 2019, so it should be gone up by now a bit. And 70% of the SEEs are working in the service provision sector. So meaning that they are really badly affected by the COVID-19, as many of them had to close their business and had to stop operation. So if you see the figure, the first table, actually these figures are coming from the survey of 365 SEEs conducted by the Korea Central Council of Social Enterprise, 사회적 기업 중앙협의회. Nationwide, 64% of SEEs experienced a drop in their revenue, more than 40%. And this damage is quite disproportionate, as this is the figure from nationwide statistics. But if you look at the figures from Daegu, which was the most affected area in Korea, there's also another survey of 800 SEEs, and they reported that their revenue had been dropped by 77.6% in March alone. So in terms of the region and also sector, culture and art and also education, they were the badly damaged in comparison to other sectors of social economy in Korea. So you can see the damage is quite disproportionate. And if you look at the second table, most of the survey respondents, more than 80%, they picked the labor expenses as the most urgent issue they face. And if you compare this figure with the just ordinary small enterprises, there is another survey conducted by Association of Small Enterprises in Korea, survey of 1,392 small enterprises. And their response was that they picked the most urgent issue as rent, paying rent. 38.6% was picked rent as their most challenging issue, followed by labor expenses, 25.9%, and also interest repayment, 17.9%. So I think we could argue that SEEs, they tend to have higher fixed costs in comparison to just ordinary small enterprises with less reserve. Also, they are focused on a more labor-intensive sector. So I think it's really crucial that we provide appropriate support for SEs to cover labor expenses, because as I said earlier, that 60% of employment they make are socially disadvantaged and vulnerable groups in society. So this is not just an employment issue, but also I think, an issue of social welfare provision. But the positive sign is that the survey respondents, they said more than half of them actually said that they have no plan of laying off their employees. So I think that's a very positive sign. And if you look at the, the last table, they picked public procurement as the most required public support they are seeking at this stage. I think this represents that many of SEEs are working closely with government and public institutions in the form of public procurement or government contracts. So I think in order for the government to make SEEs to maintain their operation and employing people, I think the role of public procurement is crucial for to support SEs under the COVID-19. And move on to the next slide, please. And so at the peak of COVID-19 in March, government started to provide finance to small enterprises, including SEEs. But the issue was that there was a huge bottleneck in the provision of government emergency loans, because mainly due to the part that surge of numbers of applications in a very short period of time, there was a bottleneck in the provision. And there were many SEEs who were unable to wait to processing the government loan schemes. And some of them were unable to access to these programs because they are low credit, or some of them were unable to also access as they were already subscribing to another form of government support programs. So they were disqualified to start with. So to solve the issue, we tried to mobilize a crisis response fund called Altogether 다 함께 initiative, which was joined by 20 partner social finance intermediaries we work closely with, also SSE supporting organizations and private companies, notably Korea Telecommunications, KT, and public institutions such as Land and Housing Corporation. Our aim was to provide low interest loan as an emergency support. And our criteria was that SEEs who dropped their profits by 50% compared to the previous 3 months, they were eligible to apply our loans. It is 1 year duration with 1.5% interest rate, which is renewable for extra year. In average, we provide $10,000 for each social economy enterprises. And in addition to this, we provided a matching fund to the crowdfunding platforms. So if there are civil movements of helping SEEs, for example, to make advance payments of SEEs products or services, or to provide bridge fund for those who are unable to wait for the government loan schemes, we provided matching funds through the major crowdfunding platforms in Korea to encourage more active civil participation. And also we tried to induce public participation by inducing some of the board of directors voluntary pay cut, about 30%, I think, and make donation that pay cut to the Altogether Crisis Response Fund. So in total, as of now, I think it's still ongoing process. So the figures should be updated regularly. But as of now, I think we have funded 23 social economy enterprises, about $200,000 since March, I think. And we also, this is domestic effort, and for overseas effort, we are discussing of launching Global Price Response Fund with KOICA, which is the major international development agency here in Korea, to provide emergency grants to SEEs to restore their production and employment capacity. We are on the process of discussing this initiative, but we are expecting that the overall size of the fund is about $830,000 US dollar, and we are trying to form consortium for this project with the GSEF, YMCA in Asia Pacific in particular, and also Korea Fair Trade Organization. Thank you for the prompt. Okay, I'll be quick. Next slide, please. Okay, post-COVID-19, I think we need to focus on, for the workers, special type of workers who are outside of institutional protection, especially in times of crisis, notably temporary workers and platform workers, also freelancers. They are not that adequately covered by conventional legal or institutional protection system, as they are unable to be defined properly as proper employees. So I think we really need to come up with proper financial products to support this special type of workers. I think one of the ways we could do is assisting them to form voluntary mutual aid fund. Recently, we worked together with workers in sewing industry, 봉제인 공제회, assist them to come up with a mutual aid fund structure, so they can help each other in times of crisis. And also, I think not only grassroots or civil society efforts, but also there should be a legal and institutional arrangement for this type of workers from the government or parliament level. And last point I would like to make is that SEs, they are not just subject or recipient of support from outside, but they are an active provider of social service in times of crisis. I know many good examples of community COVID-19 responses led by social economy enterprises. One example is there is an organization called Korea Social Economy Network, 사회적 경제 연대회의, which has 53 member SEEs. They pledged that they are targeting 0% layoffs despite these dire situations. And also there is a Buy Social campaign, which was inspired by a movement in the UK, I think, to help to promote procurement efforts of social economy enterprises from the public sector as well as private companies. And I think in post-COVID-19 era, institutionalization of the crisis response fund is crucial. In that regard, I think having strong wholesale fund like SVS Foundation, I think can play a bigger role in times of crisis, as we have established a close relationship with intermediaries in different regions of Korea. So when something happens, we can respond in partnership with them in a very timely manner. And they all have very good regional, local knowledge and relationship on the ground. So we can certainly leverage that system. So not only about wholesale fund, but also other types of legal or institutional arrangements. Really, I think we really need to prepare that in advance, as there will be another forthcoming crisis, I think, over and over again in the near future. So this COVID-19 poses us great challenges, I think, but at the same time, I believe it's an opportunity for us to rethinking the way we finance and further the way we structure our economic and social system towards a more inclusive and sustainable way. So this is it. Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jongduk Jung. I think certainly the Korea Social Value and Solidarity Foundation as the very first wholesale funds established in Korea played a very important role in this time of crisis. I think is a very concrete and creative illustration of what Patsian has said to build a collaborative platform between social finance sectors, private sectors, governments, and also social solidarity economic organizations and finance. And I think it's a very concrete case that shows how actually we could innovate and move forward with this social financial architecture and mechanisms. Thank you very much once again. I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Frank Aswani, who is the CEO of the African Venture Philanthropy Alliance. And actually he's connecting from South Africa. And Dr. Aswani, you can also explain a little bit about AVPA.
Thank you very much, Laurence. Appreciate you giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much, and thank you to GSEF for this chance to speak to your audience. My name is Dr. Frank Swaney. I'm the CEO of AVPA. We are the sister network of AVPN, so Patsian and I kind of work in the same global community. We're all trying to advance the scale and scope of social impact. AVPA, our mission is broadly to increase the flow of capital into social investments. And we are a Pan-African organization setting up a coalition and an alliance of social investors who will collaboratively work to advance Africa's social impact agenda. When the COVID crisis hit, this is from about March is when things started going on. I think the first case in Africa was probably diagnosed around March. We moved on as AVPA to do a couple of things. We set up communities of response across Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. Our headquarters are in Nairobi. I'm based in Johannesburg, but we have an office in West Africa. And we brought together communities of response. We have about 400 organizations that join those communities. And through that community field through those organizations, we moved on to create some really interesting work across the 3 countries. The community aspect in Africa is very common. You'll hear us talking a lot about things like Ubuntu or Harambe, which is collectively meaning we're better off together than we are alone. And it really is an African concept. And we've done some really interesting stuff through this last couple of months, including some cases which I'll show you today, and working with some very interesting partners. Across Africa, it's hard to talk about Africa as one country. We're 54 countries in Africa. So I'm going to try and pick very specific examples to share with you today. But in essence, if you look at the impact COVID has had in Africa, to date, we've had more of an economic crisis than we've had a healthcare crisis. Touch wood, we pray that we don't get that badly hit by the healthcare crisis. Despite the fact that the cases in Africa are rising, we haven't had our healthcare systems overwhelmed so far. And we hope it continues that way. The issue we have faced is really about lack of jobs because of the lockdowns and the closure of a lot of small businesses. So communities generally, we've seen rising unemployment. Access to food has been a major, major issue. So a lot of programs to try and distribute food, especially to the most vulnerable. And the kids who can't go to school, and especially the ones living in the rural areas or the slums of Africa and can't access online learning, have struggled a lot. Our NGOs have suffered because of reduced access to finance, because they can't reach their donors and they can't get to their programs and communities in any case because of the lockdown. Our donors have had to evolve quite dramatically. Many of them have had to spend a lot more money this year, and many have actually exhausted their 2020 budgets. But what has emerged, which is very interesting, is there's been an awareness about the greater need for collaboration more than ever before. I think more and more donors are recognizing that they'll have to work together to achieve their goals rather than continue to work separately. So that's been a positive thing coming out of this. The sad thing also is that there's no new investment. So anyone who's looking to start something new that is especially not COVID related is unlikely to get money at the moment. From a government perspective, we are concerned quite strongly about the growing public debt. Quite a number of African governments are struggling with public debt before the COVID crisis. This has been made worse with the COVID crisis. And it's especially bad because not only due to the stimulus package that they're having to inject into economies, but also because they're not earning as much from tax at the moment. So if you look at countries like South Africa that are not selling alcohol or cigarettes, and those are big providers of tax to the government, those are affecting revenues. And in fact, it's projected that for every 2 months we are on lockdown in many parts of Africa, we lose a month of GDP production. So that's quite significant. Next slide. And so as we go through this, we'll have a look and see what's happening. So I wanted to showcase to you 2 particular initiatives that are happening. And this is really to show how people in Africa have come together to work collectively. This first one is a project called Safe Hands. It's in Kenya. And when this crisis hit, these organizations came together. They were all working in the slums or in the informal settlements of Nairobi. And that's where the highest risk of impact of COVID was likely to be. So they came together and said, how can we support those informal settlements of the slums of Nairobi? And they created the Safe Hands Kenya. And within a week or so, they had a board, they had an organization, they had a CEO, and they've done some phenomenal work so far. So you'll see some multinationals there like Unilever, Coca-Cola, but a lot of local organizations as well. The next slide to show some of the impact that they are having. So to date, these Safe Hands is probably the kind of the leading face of COVID fighting in Kenya. They've distributed a lot of soap to these places, and a lot of the places where they were working were the really difficult places where there's no running water. People live in 5 or 10 people per house. There's no social distancing. The really challenging places. So this work that you're seeing here was done in the most difficult parts of Nairobi. And they've done a lot of work in the context of trying to support small and low-earning families to manage this crisis, from providing food, soap, disinfectants, masks. They've also painted murals on the streets to convey the message about staying safe, washing hands, and those kind of things. So this has been an example, and there are hundreds of these kind of initiatives happening across the continent. I want to go to the next slide to share with you a second initiative coming out of South Africa. This is the Solidarity Fund that was launched by the government in collaboration with the private sector. The target was for them to raise $240 million. They've done fairly well so far, raising about $180 million to date. And majority of that money has come from high net worth families, the corporate sector, and very little actually external help to date, but a lot of it has been driven from within South Africa. And some of the objectives they had were to mainly look at how they could support prevention, detection, care, and support around COVID. And you'll see some of the things they were aiming to do there, from testing, testing kits, purchase PPEs for hospitals and care workers, a lot of TV and media coverage of message, supporting the most vulnerable with food, and supporting women, especially due to the fact that gender-based violence went up quite significantly during this time, and how they figured out how do they support women through this crisis. From an impact perspective, they've done very well. They have exceeded the targets for food parcels to be delivered, and they've done a lot of tests in this country. South Africa, I think, as per yesterday, if I'm not wrong, on something like 2.3 million tests. And South Africa is a leading country in Africa in terms of tests done for COVID. So you can see a lot of collaborative and community-driven initiatives where people have come together to support a common goal. The next slide, we'll talk about just my closing slide in terms of what are the things that we need to look at going forward? What are the things I think we need to pursue? And if you look at Africa, and specifically around innovative finance, it's still very nascent. And where you find blended finance being applied, and there are quite a number of deals and places where blended finance has been applied, it's mainly to very big initiatives like infrastructural projects. We don't find enough blended finance being applied in smaller ticket size deals and investment opportunities. So one of the things that AVPA is doing is to start looking at how we can build capacity in Africa to enhance the concepts of innovative finance, like blended finance, for example. So I'm looking to sign some interesting MOUs, but also build an alliance of Pan-African business schools and universities that will start promoting curriculum and programs around innovative financing. And when you look at innovative financing in Africa or impact investing, we've seen very little of it being applied in the emergency phase of the pandemic. We've seen a lot more of it being done in the recovery and resilience phases, where long-term capital and structures are required. And currently, we've seen a lot of conversations ongoing about setting up of outcome-based funds and social investment bonds. The challenge we are facing with all of this is finding outcome pairs. So we've got investors who are willing to do it, but it's hard to find outcome pairs. And part of the problem with that is the policy in Africa broadly, once again, I'm talking about our continent, so bear that in mind, is there's not that much of positive policy that enhances social investment. So, for example, South Africa is the only country where you get tax rebates for donating to a nonprofit. But even then in South Africa, as a foundation, you can't play in the outcome-based space as an investor. You've got to only come in as an outcome funder. So there's all these sort of things that need to change to enhance and encourage social investment. There's also quite a bit of emphasis on SMEs to support and stimulate SMEs as ways of re-energizing the economies in the recovery phase. My advice to public authorities, finance actors, and SSE and community actors would be, I think there's no better time for us to be looking at impact investing and looking at innovative financing than now. This is the time for us to be looking at implementing new ways. For philanthropists, I think the biggest thing that philanthropists could do in this space is offer a lot more risk capital to re-stimulate the economy, test new models, and crowd in private capital. I think for private investors who've gone through as much pain as anyone else in this space, collaboration with other types of investors, especially philanthropists, is the time to be doing it. And platforms like AVPA or AVPN really support that kind of collaboration. For community actors, once again, I think look beyond your traditional means of financial sustainability and revenue generation. So we are seeing a lot more community players and organizations thinking about what IP they could have, what services they could offer to fundraise, because fundraising right now is really difficult. And they're trying to find other ways of revenue generation. SMEs really need everyone right now. They are struggling, and as the other speakers have spoken, this is the time to offer not just financial support, but also non-financial support. And the one thing that was very clear as my last point is when COVID hit, we realized how much data we did have. It was really difficult to find the right players to partner with, find the right opportunities, quantify the need. I think this is a time in the recovery phase to build strong data infrastructure, not just to inform where capital can be deployed, but also to support impact measurement. So I'll stop there, but I'll be very happy to engage with everyone, and I'll put my email in the chat group. Happy to engage with people who are interested in investing in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frank Aswani. Certainly, I think AVPA is one of the fast-growing platform of impact investors and financial actors. I have witnessed last year in Africa, actually when AVPA was officially launched in August, and now you have already built over 400 organizations on your platforms and have emerged more than 70 partnerships, and with very interesting initiatives such as, I think, what you have shared, which are really collaborative and community-driven initiatives. I think I would like to really congratulate of this very fast development. I think we all know that Africa has been very affected by this crisis, because the more than probably 80% of majority of African countries' economy are informal, and they are, even though very severely affected, and they are very invisible at the eyes of public policymakers and the government. And I think the initiative that you are building through the AVPA would be very, very important. So thank you very much for once again for this sharing of your current mobilization of AVPA in Africa. I think it has been very, very interesting. I would like to now invite our next speaker, Dr. Clifford Rosenthal. As I had said, he's not been able to be with us in person, but he has sent us his recorded voice. He's actually the founder of the Community Development Financial Institution Movement of USA, and the author of a very famous book, Democratizing Finance. Martin, please. Yeah.
This is Cliff Rosenthal talking to you from New York City, where it's 4 in the morning, so I'm sorry I can't be joining you live. I want to first of all thank the Global Solidarity Economy Forum for including me in the webinar today. As you may have heard, I've spent more than 40 years working with and for the cooperative sector, serving specifically low-income people and minorities in the United States. For more than 30 years of that time, I was the head of the National Federation of Community Development Credit Unions, which was the association for credit unions that specialized in serving low-income and minority communities. During that time, This is Cliff Rosenthal talking to you from New York City, where it's 4 in the morning, so I'm sorry I can't be joining you live. I want to first of all thank the Global Solidarity Economy Forum for including me in the webinar today. As you may have heard, I've spent more than 40 years working with and for the cooperative sector, serving specifically low-income people and minorities in the United States. For more than 30 years of that time, I was the head of the National Federation of Community Development Credit Unions, which was the association for credit unions that specialized in serving low-income and minority communities. During that time, I co-founded the Community Development Financial Institutions movement. These are special purpose financial institutions that are organized to serve the people and communities that the banks have left behind. Let me start by saying that I've lived through many crises in the United States, going back to Richard Nixon and Watergate, through 9/11, the Great Recession, and more. So what the United States is experiencing now goes beyond anything that I've lived through in my 75 years. It's not one crisis, it's not just COVID-19, it's many crises. The Corona-19 virus created some crises, but it intensified others that already existed. Before the virus, the racial wealth gap in the United States was bad and it was getting worse. Police brutality and violence was not new, but the murder of George Floyd made it nakedly apparent and impossible to ignore, even for white Americans. Meanwhile, the militarization of the police forces in the United States had gone on for nearly 20 years. The health crisis for people of color had long been a problem. People were dying younger and suffering more from disease. Now, with COVID-19, the death rates of these parts of the population are much more extreme, and it's shocking. In terms of the political crisis, since 2016, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has been destroying democratic institutions and promoting white supremacy. The virus had made this situation worse. Finally, the unemployment and economic collapse crisis is actually due to COVID to a substantial degree. The situation was not nearly as bad before. Again, the effect on people of color was worse. So what has been the response to these multiple crises that really dwarf anything else in recent U.S. history? First of all, the federal government of the United States has put out trillions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of it has gone to individuals as grants or stipends. Billions more has gone out in terms of loans that are partly forgivable to businesses. And these have included self-employed businesses, gig workers, and cooperatives, which is the good news of that. However, many Black-owned businesses did not get loans because they didn't have a prior banking relationship. They had been excluded from credit. At the municipal level, tens of millions of people in American cities are literally plunged into hunger. In New York City, the administration has taken a very active role in distributing millions of meals to people who would otherwise go hungry. It's also issued a temporary halt to evictions, but we see that problem potentially getting much, much worse soon. Meanwhile, community development financial institutions have played a more and more prominent role than in any time in their previous 30-year history. These CDFIs make loans that banks have not wanted to or been able to through the federal program and elsewise through their own resources. Often they make these with low interest rates, deferrals of interest, or forbearance that allows business borrowers to skip a payment if necessary. The good news is they've gotten greatly increased support from impact investors. And on that side, impact investors have been increasingly establishing new funds and investments specifically in Black-owned businesses, specifically in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. And as I mentioned, there's been increased investment in CDFIs, which have proven to be an effective way to reach businesses that these funds have not been able to reach directly. So what do we need to change the dynamics and landscape of finance in the United States? First of all, for the investment sector, let's look at flipping the investment paradigm. Wealthy investors should bear the greatest risk and get the lowest return if we want to improve inequality. Community investors should bear the least risk and get the highest return. And we see examples of these emerging, such as the Boston Impact Investment Fund. On the community side, what we've begun to see and hope to see more of are exciting new examples of community-owned, democratically organized and owned investment funds. On the East Coast of the United States, one example is the Boston Ujima Fund, which stands for Collective Work and Responsibility. On the West Coast, the Revolutionary Economy for All Local Peoples Fund, or the REAL Fund. And what these funds do is engage communities in a way that they've never been engaged before. They own these entities that they have created. They set the standards for what types of businesses should get loans. And in some cases, they even make the individual investment and lending decisions, using voting at many stages of the process in a way that it's never been used before. In the public sector, it's really essential, if we want to reduce inequality, to protect against the displacement of communities and people of color. Gentrification has brought huge changes in the complexion of major urban centers particularly, and it's important to develop policies that will limit and protect local people from these sorts of massive changes. On the federal level, what the government can do is increase access to loan guarantees and equity investments, especially and specifically for businesses owned by people of color. The federal government can hugely increase the investment in community development financial institutions, which have played such an important role in filling the gap in the current financial crisis. Finally, let me conclude by offering some general observations. First of all, as I mentioned, these crises are cross-sectoral and intersectional and at a magnitude that we have not previously seen in the United States. COVID-19 has not caused all of them, but it has certainly intensified them. And what it has done is drive much wider the fault lines in the United States political, social, and economic systems. There's no question that the results of these crises are going to linger, and perhaps for a long time, and quite possibly they may get worse. But on the positive side, the Black Lives Movement has mobilized millions and millions of people across the United States, not only in the big cities that you hear about, but in small towns that have never ever seen this kind of resurgence of activism, and specifically of solidarity. The term of solidarity is not one that's widely used in the United States today, and particularly the solidarity economy concept is not that widely known. However, we are at least now seeing examples of social solidarity across racial and ethnic lines to a degree that we have never really seen in my lifetime. The next 6 months are going to be extremely critical for the future of the United States. I'm talking politically, of course, that if the current trends are not reversed with a change of administration, the crises are going to get much, much worse. But the challenge for the solidarity movement is to convert the enormous momentum that we've seen generated by Black Lives Matter into lasting institutions. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think it also offers some grounds for optimism in a way that we haven't seen before. So let me leave you on that note.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clifford Rosenthal. Even though he's not with us, I think his contribution has been very, very important. We know the political as well as economic weight of the United States. And as we see every day through the news, actually that we are quite unable to understand, in this multi-sectoral, inter-sectoral, community-related crisis that country is going through, what has been the situation of social solidarity economy and also a community-driven finance. So I think his contribution has been very well appreciated. I think all those participants who would like to ask questions to him, you can raise your questions on chat box. We will make sure that he will get your questions and he will come back to you by email. Thank you very much. And I would like to invite our last speaker, Mr. Daniel Sorrosal, who is the Secretary General of the European Federation of Ethical and Alternative Banks. Mr. Sorrosal, floor is yours. I think you have been waiting for a long time.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank again GSEF for inviting us. It should have been my president in this place, but he has ill health for the moment, so I've had to stop my holidays and step in. And I would like to give you a slightly different perspective because Europe sometimes is a bit more complicated than other places, so we'll be in a more complicated way. The organization that I represent, Febea, is a network of 28 banks and non-banking financial institutions. So we are basically intermediaries who work closely with the European authorities and also national authorities. And our job is really to mobilize citizen capital and invest it in the social and solidarity economy, essentially. And we invested in an ethical way. So we have a very long charter of principles, which basically constrain what we can do and push us in the direction of what we want to do, which is basically investing in green and social endeavors. We are a European organization based in Brussels, so we are also kind of a bit of a lobby organization. So a lot of the approach that we have taken as a network in this current COVID crisis has been focused on lobby. What COVID has meant for the social and solidarity economy in Europe is basically a freeze of activity, both economic and social, and a freeze in the flow of funding, which has basically put organizations that were mostly, let's say, sound and safe in their work in a very vulnerable situation. And our response to that has been to make sure that in the very large public effort that have been undertaken by both the European authorities, the supra-government, and the specific government within Europe, the social solidarity economy is not forgotten. That was basically our first task, to remind them that whatever you are doing to support SMEs and to support large companies, which has been quite substantial efforts, do also reach social solidarity economy. This all happened basically in the month of, I would say, April, beginning of May, where we had to really make a very big push amongst many organizations to remind our governments and supra-government that social solidarity economy was not only key in the reconstruction after COVID, but it had to be supported so that it could basically wait a very deep crisis that we have gone under in Europe in terms of health. Our strategy in doing that has been basically threefold. No? First, we try to take ourselves a number of measures, mostly voluntarily, which were dedicated to buy time. As financial intermediaries, we introduced moratoriums, we introduced all kinds of flexibility, we improved the terms of any financing that was already ongoing, we renegotiated agreements, we moved the whole operations online, and we basically tried to make sure that any social solidarity economy organizations that was in dealings with us, that had a loan with us and had investment with us, could survive the crisis. So we tried to buy them time, working on an environment of around 6 months. So we started in March, and we are looking at September for a second wave of action. Once we did that, we could come back to our governments and say, look, this is what we did, and we are not large banks. Now you can do a lot more to help us as intermediaries. So basically what we managed to obtain was a specific package of measures that for a period of 1 year would cover, with exceptional conditions, the activity that we were doing. So basically most of our COVID-related lending will be guaranteed up to 90% by the European institutions, with a large increase in volumes and a large increase in flexibility. This has basically been a very big safe line that has not only increased the vulnerability of our members as financial intermediaries, which is now addressed in a different way, so they can continue to work without basically exposing their risk or exploiting their risk. And at the same time, it's a real lifeline that is given to social and solidarity organizations that can access funding in much better conditions for a first, let's say, round of surviving. What we are now doing is preparing like the second round or the third round, actually. So we did a number of things. We lobbied to get basic support. Now we are trying to think collectively with our members on the ways to strengthen the organizations that we think will have come out of the crisis, I would say, weakened, certainly. And at the same time, we are trying to make sure they are first strengthened through some sort of combination of, I would say, equity or emergency grants that can help to recapitalize them. But also we are trying to work very closely with a number of other networks in creating an alliance of organizations working on social and green aspects, because we think the crisis is also an opportunity to rebuild our economies on much more fair and green grounds. And there, the social and solidarity economy has a lot to play and a lot to say. So therefore, we are trying to save the sector for now, but we are also trying to recapitalize it and basically put it in the right moment to materialize the opportunities that will come out in terms of public procurement, investment, and otherwise that will help us basically rebuild our economies in a different way. So we are not so much mobilizing capital at the moment, because capital exists and a lot of public money is being mobilized, but we are trying to make sure that all of these massive amounts of money that have been mobilized by the European institutions and countries do come on the side of the social and solidarity economy, and we want to be in a protagonist role in the reconstruction of the economy from, I would say, September onwards. I don't know if that's enough in terms of timing, but I think this is what I have to say so far.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sorrosal. I don't think it's enough. I think certainly we should have given much more time for your very diverse and important activities of Febea, because I think European Federation of Ethical and Alternative Banks is a very important driver and player of building inclusive and sustainable finance for the social solidarity economy, not only in Europe, but certainly for a global movement of social solidarity economy. But I think, you know, that we do have a very limited time. So I think certainly we will probably get some questions from the participants in order to have a little bit of interactive dialogue. Thanks a lot for your participation and contribution. We have already received a few questions coming from participants, as well as some questions received at the GSEF Secretariat. So I would like to share, first of all, question from Savitri Senj, who said, I'm from cooperative sector. Any example from Coop Credit Union? I think we have posted already on chat box. Actually, that we have not focused any speaker on cooperative sector, because there is a ILO cooperative unit who is organizing also series of webinars, as well as publishing a regular report. So I think you can probably visit those links, www.ilo.org, and then global topics and cooperatives. So I think you can also join to some of their webinars. Second question is from Tadokoro, not specifying to any speaker particularly, but maybe I think Dr. Sorrosal or Mr. Jongduk or any other speaker, you know, Patsian or Aswani can respond. How about the relationship with your government to tackle the COVID-19? Good or still have any room to improve? This is a question from Tadokoro. And then one question is directly addressed to Dr. Frank Aswani. Could you please let me know about blending financing approach for big projects, more than $10 million with success model? And then also a question coming from, also going to the Dr. Frank as, I think, no, it's question coming from Kenya, participant from Kenya. Who are the major source of funding for social solidarity economy? Public, private, international organization, domestic, foreign, international bank, etc. What is the difference between countries? I think certainly, I think Dr. Sorrosal also can respond to this. So maybe I think I would suggest Dr. Sorrosal, can you probably, Dr. Sorrosal as well as Dr. Aswani, can you respond to this question? Because I think this participant has to leave within, okay. Oh, sorry, Frank, Dr. Frank Aswani has to leave in 15 minutes. So can you, I will give the floor first to Dr. Aswani to reply.
Thank you, Laurence. So I'll respond to, I think, the two questions. The first one is about the involvement of governments. I think African governments...
blending financing approach, yes.
Yes, yeah. I think African governments have tried quite a bit with regards to what they need to do to stimulate the economies, but the reality is they're overwhelmed. I think whatever money they're able to give is a grain of sand in the ocean of finance required. This is why, it's another reason why I think this is the time for us to try and test different innovative financing models. So for example, if African governments would look at employing an outcome-based funding, they could get investors who could invest upfront in some of the needs that are required right now and only be able to pay back later. So in many ways, the citizens would get the benefits today, but the government as an outcome funder would only pay later. And it would buy them a bit of time to sort out some of the other more pressing COVID-related things. In terms of blended finance deals, or there are quite a number, I would ask people to go to a website called convergence.finance. I think it's www.convergence.finance, and I'll put it on the chat. There's a lot of deals there of blended finance in Africa, and especially in East Africa. In fact, East Africa is probably one of the biggest centers for blended finance deals at infrastructural level. So if you go to that website, there's a wind farm up in the northern part of Kenya that's looking at renewable energy near a place called Turkana. So there's a lot of deals you'll find in there talking to blended finance. So I'll put the website on the chat, but go to convergence.finance and you'll be able to find a lot of blended finance deals in Africa.
Thanks to Dr. Aswani, but are you able to also respond to the second question?
Sorry, which is the second question?
Could you please let me know about blending financing approach for big projects more than $10 million with success model?
Oh yeah, so that's the one I was talking about. I think if you go, there's quite a number. There's, as I mentioned, there's one. I don't have the details on my fingertips, but if you
more
go
information on your
yeah. I'll put a website here of convergence.finance, an organization called Convergence, who are the leading blended finance experts in Africa, and you'll be able to find a lot of deals there.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think I understand that you have to leave us very soon. So if you are leaving while we are, responding to some of those questions, thanks a lot for joining us, and all the success. I think what you are doing with AVPA in Africa is very important. And I hope that we will have much more opportunity to collaborate. Thanks a lot. And then I would like to also give some other questions to other speakers. So anyway, Dr. Sorrosal, you can respond to that question. Who are the major source of funding for SSE, public-private international organization, domestic foreign international bank, and so on? And what is the difference between countries? And I think there are also a question from a question to Social Value Solidarity Foundation. You presented that the public procurement is an important point for the SSE actors. How this is institutionalized in Korea? Is it at the national government level support by regulations or by the local government level measures? And to Patsian, AVPN, it will be important for the SSE actors to learn more about intermediary institutions and investors. How this could be done? What is your approach or effort for this regard? Okay, so who will respond first? Maybe Dr. Sorrosal?
Okay, I would say that in Europe, we have one line that divides the continent in the middle. We call it the olive oil line. So you have north of that, you have countries of cooked with butter, and south of that, you have countries of cooked with olive oil. This is basically explains the Latin versus Anglo-Saxon type of world. In the Latin world in Europe, it is basically France, Italy, Spain, Belgium, Portugal, Greece. I would say the main sources of funding for the solidarity economy would be citizen capital. So basically, it's specialized intermediaries who are mobilizing funding from citizens directly, either as some sort of cooperative investment or other forms of investment into banks or other kinds of intermediaries, and they are channeling it towards investments, I would say, with a set of rules that they give themselves, which is basically, first of all, excluding anything that is harming society, but generally dedicating it only to things that improve society. This would be probably the largest chunk of money available today. For example, in our federation, this represents around 30 billion euros Europe-wide, which translates into around 18 billion loan book, which is mostly typical of land. The second tier of, I would say, investment is sources of public investments, which is much more available in terms of, I would say, guarantees and other schemes that support existing capital to be deployed in, let's say, more risky areas of society. So you would have a lot of guarantee schemes, either European or national, that are contributing to bring money to what is most needed. And I would say you have a third, a very important emerging sector, which would be the investment sector, which is a very growing reality. but I would say in terms of volumes in Europe, it's still far behind the other two. However, it tends to be more innovative and much more new ways of keeping finance. So you would have basically three pillars, which don't always work together, I would say, but probably the governmental and the citizen capital have history of working together. I think the challenge for us is to build bridges towards impact investors to work much more closely with the financial intermediaries. I'm not sure I responded to the question fully, but I think I did out there.
Thank you very much. So, Patsian, would you like to respond to the question that it will be very important for the SSE actors to learn more about intermediary institutions and investors, how this could be done? What is your approach or effort for this regard?
Thank you very much. It's a really good question, and I'd like to say that on behalf of all organizations who are intermediary organizations, we all have a very, very hard life. We do very important work, and it is not well supported because we are in the middle of the ecosystem. And one of the challenges that we have found is that intermediary organizations sometimes face challenges on both ends, both in terms of being connected to the providers of resources and also, on the other hand, to be connected to the organizations that need resources. And one of the things that we have seen in terms of the more successful ones in Asia, and I will preface that by saying that every intermediary organization we know now is facing the same challenge, which is also to be able to achieve financial sustainability for their own work. In addition to ensuring that all of their stakeholders are able to be resilient through this crisis. They have worked very hard to identify where and how they can add value to the ecosystem that they're in the middle of. So there is work being done to better understand, for example, one of our members, Angin, which is the largest network of angel investors in Indonesia. They very quite clearly realized that one of the biggest needs in the marketplace for Indonesia was transparency of data and understanding the landscape of where and how early stage businesses can be supported by private capital in Indonesia. There was a need to better understand the regulatory landscape, understand the legal structures and the various financing channels that are possible. And so they put in enough effort to position themselves to offer research and to offer market intelligence and data that they're drawing from their stakeholders to add that value to the needs of the organizations that are going to them in Indonesia. The other is another example that I can think of is what our friends are doing in Korea. Earlier on when the social and solidarity economy movement is growing. There was a need for providing a safe space for early stage ideas to grow, for innovation to happen, and to then for intermediaries to play the very important role of nurturing and bringing that value through the ecosystem so that the potential financiers and investors are able to have a good pipeline of opportunities to work with. And that can lead also to the incubation of other forms of financing vehicles like wholesale funds and so forth. So I think the third point I wanted to bring up about intermediaries is that they play a very important role in advocating for the industry. So because intermediaries are in the best place to be able to share the voice of the resource provider, the resource receiver, the ground organizations, and also to engage with regulators and policymakers in this space as well. So if we're able to articulate the kinds of value that intermediaries bring, there are opportunities then for the intermediary to be able to connect with a wider range of stakeholders and also potentially a wider range of partners.
Thank you very much, Patsian. I think it was very, very interesting response. Mr. Jong, are you there? So I think, can you respond? Yes, can you respond to that question? Public procurement is an important point for the SSE actors, how this is institutionalized in Korea, Is it at the national government level supported or by the local government level by different measures?
Okay, I think it is happening at the public central government level as well as at the local government. And also the initiatives is happening in civil society and private sector as well. For example, nowadays, the central government evaluating public institutions and public corporations, their performance based on the social value they create. So public procurement certainly one of the best ways of showing their commitment to the social value they generate. And also, as far as I know, at the parliament, there is law on basic framework law on social value as well as social economy law underway, are waiting to be passed. So I think at the central government level, there are many positive signs on the way, and at the local government level. Okay, so at the local government level as well, there are many ordinances to support the public procurement initiatives for local governments. And also there are many guidelines, I think, available for them to enhance their efforts of public procurement. And also recent initiative at the civil society, I think I mentioned it briefly about bi-social campaign launched very months ago, I think. The SVS Foundation is also joining this initiative. I think there is certainly a role to play by private funds in the procurement sector. So I would say it's not just initiative or project or campaign led by a public sector alone or local government level alone. It's happening simultaneously at all the levels, I think. And yeah, I think legalization certainly will help to institutionalize these efforts. And I think also civil society voluntary approach is crucial for us to promoting this campaign.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jung. I think what he just shared is very important, because I think in many of Asian countries where we do not have a legal framework already developed by the national or central government, but I think it will be very important actually to mobilize both local and national governments to develop certain public policies, such as the public procurement, even though that legal frameworks are not yet in place to support social solidarity economy. I think it will be very important actually to start wherever is possible to build those collaborative platforms and bridges between authorities, political authorities, and social solidarity economy sectors. And of course, as he mentioned, it's very important to build this solidarity with consumers and with citizens in the form of campaigns as well as solidarity actions. I think that we are time up, but there is one question addressed to GSEF, I think from Mr. Sepides Musabi. Does GSEF has a presence in the Middle East? Unfortunately, not yet. Well, I think we do have our presence in Palestine, but I wouldn't call that, could be called the Middle East, but it's just one member, and we would like to develop more presence in the Middle East. And also, you are interested to represent and to develop a social impact investment firm in the Middle East. I think you are already in touch with Patsian Law, and Patsian has replied to you that she will be very keen to get in touch with you. So I think certainly AVPN could be a best partner who can really accompany and support you. But also if you would like to develop a collaborative partnership between local governments and social solidarity economy sectors in the Middle East, we are most happy to get in touch with you and to work with you. And I think there are many of our dear members and steering committee members who are connected, including Mr. Buon Nam, who is the General Secretary of the YMCA Asia Pacific region, Dr. Manoj Kumar from India and New Taipei City, I think Mr. Jacob Lin, and also the Taipei City, the Charlotte. I'm sorry that I cannot, greet you all individually, but we are very happy actually that you are with us. I think probably participants would like to continue for more time, but I think we have promised to all our speakers that this webinar is going to be ending at 6:30. I mean 6:30 in Korea's time, but only for 1 hour and a half. I think we have consumed the time what we have promised. And as I said, I think if you would like to ask more questions, you can still address to GSEF Secretariat, and we will make sure those questions will get to the speakers and you will get some of those responses. So I would like to thank very sincerely to all our speakers for their very valuable participation and contribution to this webinar. I think this team has been very important, and I think we have get to know each other much better, and also to know about very recent innovative practice. And I think we can continue to exchange with each other by emails and also through GSEF network. As we have just shown that our next webinar will take place in September, and the English one will be on 29 September. It will be on new SSE ecosystems after the COVID-19. So what about the health sectors, education, informal economy, and the fourth industrial revolution with digital and intelligence AI. So please stay with us and also continue to visit our website for more updated informations. Thanks a lot to everybody and enjoy your evening. Thanks a lot. Enjoy your afternoon and morning. And many thanks to our speakers. Thanks a lot.